This is the presentation of the Planning Department's preliminary recommendations for the Northeast Embarcadero study. Principle 1. Building along the waterfront. San Francisco's historic pattern of a moderately scaled, dense city fronting the working waterfront across the Embarcadero remains fundamental to its character. This is true for most comparably scaled great waterfront cities in the world. At previous workshops, we were asked to present images and ideas from such cities. This principle holds for the classical Stockholm, seen in this slide, and here, as well as for contemporary Stockholm. This is a slide of classical Copenhagen and contemporary Copenhagen. This pattern of mid-rise 6 to 8 story buildings lining a gracious public promenade is typical of many European cities. Some participants mentioned Hamburg, pictured here. Considered one of the best examples of waterfront rejuvenation, Hamburg is renovating many of its old piers. The new development is pictured here. You can see the promenade with gracious public spaces, periodically punctuating the public realm, and the pattern of 6 to 8 story buildings. The North American example is quite different. Typically high-rise residential and office buildings line either a public promenade, or here in the case of Chicago, along a public beach, with an expressway separating the city from the waterfront. And this is also true for the lakefront development, pictured here, with commercial buildings on the left and residential buildings on the right. Many people think of Millennium Park and that it is a waterfront park. Indeed, it is not, but it is still worth noting that Chicago has chosen to frame its public space with strikingly tall buildings. Toronto's downtown waterfront, akin to the area that we are considering here in San Francisco, uses the same model, with a generous promenade and periodic parks along their base. Finally, San Francisco often thinks of Vancouver as a kin city, and it certainly has a wonderful public promenade lining almost its entire waterfront. But through its downtown area, Vancouver uses tall buildings, a form that it pioneered, to frame its public realm. Indeed, it's how it's paid for most of its public amenities. Therefore, our preliminary recommendation is to strengthen San Francisco's historic character by establishing a continuous or near-continuous urban edge along the western side of the Embarcadero. Also, to encourage new development on now open land. The second principle, respecting San Francisco's topography. Topography is a defining San Francisco feature, especially for neighborhoods such as Telegraph Hill and Russian Hill. To weaken this visual prominence of the city's hills and ridges would weaken one of San Francisco's basic images. As a general principle, buildings and structures that accentuate the rise and fall of topography through their own height and bulk serve to celebrate important landforms, such as Telegraph Hill, seen here, and Russian Hill, seen here. Coit Tower is perhaps one of the more iconic views in the city. It appears and disappears from view as one walks along the Embarcadero or through North Beach, obscured by foliage or buildings. Therefore, our preliminary recommendation is: views toward Coit Tower from certain locations should be preserved. Urban design guidelines should protect those views to the extent possible, and public views from the hills and ridges above the northeast waterfront to the Embarcadero, the ferry building, and San Francisco Bay must be considered and respected. Principle 3, strengthening the city's pattern. The continuity or near continuity of San Francisco's street grid, including its extension across hills and to the water's edge, is fundamental to the city's pattern and an inseparable city image to residents and visitors. Providing views down streets to important open spaces, civic buildings, and waterfronts is a fundamental principle of urban design. Some streets use landscaping to help emphasize the city's pattern, as with Dolores Street pictured here. A view down Broadway to the water is another example. Our preliminary recommendation is to visually connect streets terminating at the Embarcadero to the waterfront. Establish pedestrian connections on streets terminating at the Embarcadero to the waterfront, and that these connections will be made over time as the opportunity arises. Principle 4, recognizing the citywide role of the Northeast waterfront. The Northeast Embarcadero waterfront is a resource of citywide, regional, and statewide significance, and the importance of this resource must be respected. The bay and the city's connection to it are indelible pieces of San Francisco's history. The unique role waterfronts play in all waterfront cities elevates their prominence relative to other city districts and requires special consideration of the use and design of properties along their edge. This is a picture of Frankfurt's waterfront. Similarly, a picture of Copenhagen's waterfront. Striking architecture is often a part of this effort to celebrate the city's waterfront. Here is a novel reuse of former soybean silos. Hamburg's Hafen City, mentioned before, certainly conforms to this principle, as does San Francisco. Our preliminary recommendation is that the use of land and design of buildings along the Northeast Embarcadero should be based on the needs defined by the larger public context. In addition to the civic centrality of the area, its proximity to major transit infrastructure, the downtown, and other major destinations must be carefully weighed before any final decision is made. Therefore, we recommend that surface parking and above-grade structured parking is inappropriate here. Existing surface parking should be phased out, and to the extent that parking is needed in the area, it must be below grade or accommodated in adjacent development, and or managed by a strong on- and off-street parking management program. Principle 5, providing public open space. Adequate public open space and public recreational facilities are fundamental needs in all San Francisco neighborhoods. The bay, the piers, and bulkhead buildings in the Embarcadero Promenade constitute a neighborhood, citywide, and regional open space resource equal to any in the world. The proposed Northeast Waterfront Plaza on Pier 27 will constitute a significant public open space resource on the Embarcadero. Sidney Walton Park and the open spaces at the foot of Market Street greatly add to this richness. There is a deficiency, however, in the proximity to opportunities for publicly accessible, active recreation for the southern part of the study area, and this deficit should be remedied. This part of the city has access to some of the most stunning open spaces found along any waterfront, and the anticipated improvements will only further enhance the quality of the public realm. Therefore, our